Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 24 of the Making Noise podcast. My name is Adam Kana. I'm your host. For those of you who watch this on YouTube and have seen it before, you might be wondering why you're only hearing me and not seeing me. Well, there's a simple answer to that. Something's going on with my camera. So I decided to just record the audio introduction and release this as is because time is of the essence. In any case, today's episode is a very exciting one. My friend Erin Rogers, composer and saxophonist, we've been planning on having her on for a while and it just hasn't worked out, and finally we made it happen. And this conversation is incredibly exciting because we talk a lot about Erin's recent album titled 2,000 Miles. She recorded this album entirely improvised works. And throughout the conversation, she talks a lot about her process for improvisation, her process for recording, traveling from where she lives in New York City all the way back to Alberta, Canada, her hometown, where she recorded in her family's basement. She talks about the way she views the music that she writes and how she thinks about it, because on this album and a lot of the other music she writes, it's very centered on what you call extended techniques, right? Sound-based techniques like multiphonics, air sounds, microtones are sometimes thrown in there and stuff. And Erin describes it in a way where she says something like, those techniques are now the world, meaning the world that the music exists in. Anything outside of that is usually of a conventional, traditional sense of what music is, like a melodic line, becomes a feature. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about that. It's a lot of how I think about my music too. In any case, it's so insightful to listen to her behind the curtain explanation of everything, and then even go to listen to the album, which you can find on Bandcamp and you can purchase digital form or CD. So in any case, a few other things I want to mention before we get to the episode. Some events Erin has coming up. December 2nd, new Thread Quartet is performing for Marilyn Shrewd's 75th birthday celebration. December 11th, Pope Bama is performing works by themselves and Rick Burkhart. December 15th, Hypercube is performing works by New York women composers. And either December 16th or 17th, it'll be put in the description below, pianist Kathy Sapovi will be premiering one of Erin's works on Barge Music, which is a boat that goes around, I think, Manhattan. And all these ensembles, by the way, New Thread, Popama, and Hypercube, as well as Thing NY, I didn't mention that one. These are ensembles that Erin is a part of. So that is just to give you an idea of the multifaceted, varied aspects of the career that she leads. It's incredibly inspirational. And I always admired her for that, because I have trouble with balancing even, days when I work out and composing and everything else. So in any case, without any further delay, here is Erin Rogers. Let's go make some noise. My name is Adam Kana, and I am a collaborative composer. Join me in the search for a career in classical music. This is the Making Noise podcast. Yeah, I know. Driving through the city and stuff like that, that's no joke.
Especially now, everybody bought cars during the pandemic. I was
Oh,
reading
really?
Yeah, yesterday I read an article about how it was a Gothamist article, basically said that subway ridership is still way down, and you can see it on the roads. I mean, you just see everyone's got cars. I mean, I'm driving a car to a rehearsal studio later because it'll be a tenth of the time, but also we got used to doing that during the pandemic because subway or mass transit we didn't know how safe it was for a long period of time. So
that makes a lot of sense. That is something that never crossed my mind. Wow.
You're in Chicago, right?
Yeah, but I've always driven and always had a car.
Yeah.
So I've never, and even like what I do around Chicago, it doesn't necessitate me having to take public transportation.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Wow. So you have a car now?
Yeah, I do. And So my partner Dennis Sullivan and I, we both we moved um, back and forth a lot during the pandemic. He had a place upstate that he was renting in order to have. He's a percussionist, so needed a large space. And a friend up there had a space that he could store everything and actually, hit the drums, which is really hard to do in a New York apartment. We isolated in my apartment for the first 4 months of the pandemic, and you can hear your neighbors working from home, and the idea of hitting a snare drum really loud or blasting multiphonics just left the table for a while. So we went upstate and worked there, did a lot of videoing, a lot of recording up there, and then as a result needed a car. So yeah, I now have a car that I drive around here too. But like I say, I mean, the biggest issue right now is finding parking. Even
Oh
in
yeah.
Queens where I live, right? It's really changed. So, and it's not ideal. I mean, mass transit is really the most economic way to get around. It's the best. It's the most environmentally friendly way. So I hope that eventually we can get rid of the car. Go back to the way I lived here 15 years without a car. So I'm sure we can get back to that point.
I imagine so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, things are definitely, uh, there's a swing back to normal in certain ways, like here in Chicago, there are restaurants last year that during the winter restaurants had, I imagine New York City might've been similar, had outdoor seating with tents and the heaters and stuff.
Hmm.
And they're still doing that. So I kind of wonder if that's going to sort of be like a new thing for restaurants to maintain their outdoor, like, maintain business during the colder seasons.
Yeah, I read an article recently. I don't know if it was Times or not, but there is a debate as to whether or not to make those outdoor spaces permanent
Mhm.
for restaurants. I mean, but that I mean, there's effects from that, right? There's less room on the street now
Mhm.
for parking for more cars. So I mean, there's much more logjam, and you know, there's less room to walk on on a lot of the sidewalks too,
Yeah.
or run or whatever for pedestrian use. So, but that's a whole other issue which I know nothing about. So
Right. Yeah. It's always interesting to think about that stuff, like the trade-offs that come along with something new that is beneficial in one way, but then it's like, well, these things are being compromised, you
yeah,
know?
a lot of times you don't see those effects until way later, and so you change a traffic path. You make this road, you can't make a left turn on this road. Well, all of a sudden it affects the rate of asthma on this side street where there are residences because all the traffic eventually goes to that other street, and it's
Mm.
like you don't see that for years. And who does those studies? There's more studies we don't do than studies we do. So yeah, I understand that. I have a friend who is an urban planner and talks a lot about those types of things that they deal with, when they're trying to create new traffic patterns. So yeah, fascinating world.
It's funny because it literally makes me think about composing, where I've run into this a bunch of times where I'm working with a performer or something, and you'll try to do a layering of techniques, but like say for example, like I'll play this multiphonic, but then with a little bit of vibrato, and then introduce all this air, and then start trilling with this finger, and then by the point you're layering it so much that it like cancels out the initial thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I understand. It becomes its own creature, right? It's a different. A lot of times, its own creature doesn't sound like much at the end. But yeah, I do understand what you mean. It's like how many things can you do at once to one thing and still have it retain that identity? So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. But it's good to try it. Then you know it, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's actually some of the stuff I think is really interesting too, is like starting with this, okay, do this, start with this thing, but then let's go into implementing all this other stuff. If you flutter tongue at the top, what then happens to the sound?
Hmm. Yeah. No, and it changes so much. I can barely keep track of it, and I play the instrument. So like saxophone specific um, world, you don't know until you really try
Uh,
all the things out yourself, um, that, you know, that it works. And then there's the question of, can you do it on command every time immediately, and can you do it at the dynamic that's needed? Like there's I'm constantly like ripping through multiphonics, like, whoa, that does that, that's right, okay, that does that if I do this, okay, right. And then I go and approach it again a month later. Oh, I thought that did that. Well, I guess it doesn't do that. And maybe I've changed my read or something. Like it's like everything is very temperamental. So yeah, I don't know. I think like lately what I've been doing is trying to write for the most stable ideas possible, the things that I can always, you know, guarantee will happen or will work, right? And then calculate where you're going to place your risk in your piece. Maybe it's somewhere else.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense too, especially if it's something that you want other people to perform later and stuff, and or even just yourself, you know, like to maintain the character of the piece.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real challenge, especially in this world of, you know, just sort of subjective techniques. Every variable is different for everybody. And you know, we are walking very like worlds of variables ourselves. So how I blow my setup, the things I, you know, the way I, you know, approach the saxophone, my embouchure, you know, it's all, that means that maybe on that day I can hit that the way I want to hit it, but does that mean anybody else is going to in that same way? And is that the goal, right? So a lot of times when working with players, it's just best to, you know, start the workshop process early and figure out the things that they like to do, the things that they, you know, prefer to do and feel comfortable doing. You know, and that's not even to get into pedagogy. Everyone's had a different sort of upbringing on how to do certain techniques or what techniques to even, you know, try to execute. So there's that whole world too. So you know, when composing for others, it's best to go to them first.
That's so true. That's so true. I mean, because I've definitely experienced that before, and you know, the Techniques of Saxophone Playing book by Marcus Weiss is like, you know, that's the multiphonic, you know, that's the go-to for multiphonics and stuff. And but there's so many times where it's like I'll have a piece that one saxophonist plays and then another saxophonist plays, and they're like, this is multiphonic, it doesn't work on my horn or something like that. And that's just, you know, yeah, to your point. It's pretty crazy. I mean, it makes sense, obviously. Like you said, there's all these variables. I'm curious, with, well, let's talk about your album that you just released.
Sure.
Because this is like this conversation is making me think a lot about that. But you have your album 2000 Miles, which is fucking sick.
Thanks, Adam.
Absolutely. The opening track, what's the other one? Angelface, is that one?
Yeah, Angelface is the no mouthpiece track.
That, okay. I was gonna ask about that. And then the last one, I can't remember. It's like 18 minutes long, right?
Yeah, New Moon.
New Moon. Oh my God. Those pieces of mine, I was like, after I heard that, I was like, yep, that's crazy. I'm gonna I want to talk about that one.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, this whole conversation about like layering techniques and stuff like that, like in that album, on a lot of the tracks at least, but like it seems like you're doing just that, is like taking certain sounds and manipulating it in certain ways. Am I accurate in saying that? Like, could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. It's sort of, I mean, the idea is to create narrative pieces out of these extended techniques, right? Which, you know, at least in my early years playing, were used in, I wouldn't say a novel way, but were used as these moments of stepping outside of a realm. Whereas in 2000 Miles, they are central to that realm. They are the house, right? Like it's built on these sounds, and these sounds are, I mean, justifiably the saxophone. You know, they aren't twisting the saxophone to play in a different way than it should. They are the saxophone, and so if I exit at one point and play, you know, a very beautiful melody, that becomes sort of the outside extended vocab of any of these pieces. Just and I felt like it's not only my first instinct when I'm playing. It's just it like, because it's a sound world. A lot of these techniques just open up to sound worlds that I feel have a lot of agency within, and a lot of I find new things in them all the time because they aren't necessarily as stable as the tuned notes on the saxophone, as we've learned them growing up or approaching the instrument to begin with. So for me, also it also includes that whole world of experimentalism. I like, okay, if I do this double trill on this key, I get microtone, and I'm also getting this kind of overtone in a strange way that I haven't heard before, but let's dig into it a little bit more. So as an album that it tries to remember everything that's been done throughout a work and bring it back. It tries to learn the horn as you go, and each track tries to do that, sort of starting from a different starting place, right? So the very first track, New Moon, plays a lot with microtonality, and I think it starts on like an F quarter flat, or no, that's the second. Sorry, not New Moon, that's Home, which there are two Home tracks. There's Home 1 and Home 2, and both of them play on, I think one's on like an A quarter flat, the other's on an F quarter flat or something. Anyway, I start at those points and just build and kind of move up microtonally. So it has this sense of like pitch resolving too, not quite in a leading tone kind of way, but in a way that it fits within the narrative that's been created thus far. So that those both work similarly, and then have their excursions, have their sort of formal B sections, and then return home. And so that's one example. Angelface is one, like I said, with our mouthpiece, where you set the tone immediately. This is the vocabulary of this piece, and where it departs and returns to it, take the listener in a different direction. And it's easy to do that on an audio album where you're not watching a saxophonist. A lot of times when you're watching a player, you're thinking of all the things they're doing, as opposed to just kind of hearing the sounds and imagining the sounds, as themselves and part of a statement, right? So I mean, it could be, Angelface could be coming from any possible vessel, right? It's more concentrated on what the sound is doing and what the message is that's being put across, how it's communicating, as opposed to it being like, check out the air sounds I can make on the saxophone, right?
Yeah.
And then Township Road 494 is the sort of exploration into harmonics and playing with very, very unstable harmonics at the top of sort of that top of the harmonic structure that I'm able to get on the saxophone, on the tenor sax. So I'm fingering very, very low fingerings, but playing within that very, very fragile space. And that there not only has a sort of constant quality of being part of the spectrum that relates to that sort of low pedal that keeps coming in, but also those higher partials. They have their, like I said, their fragility, which creates this sort of experimental and exciting narrative. Like, will it be able to resolve to that? Is she able to get that note that feels like it's the right note to happen right now? Is that going to squeak through? And so I liked playing in that space too, which is kind of antithetical to the space, that a lot of the instrumental repertoire I learned growing up, where it's like, you learn to execute this and then you execute it 100% of the time if you can, and that's the goal. This is the opposite of that. It's exploring in a space, and sometimes the most interesting moments are when the note is not achieved, or it's barely achieved, or it contains that sort of humanism, that fragility, and so that's more or less the aesthetic of the record. It's playing with a lot of different things and a lot of different levels, but mostly it's what I was interested in playing at that time. And I can also talk about a little about the recording process, which was during the pandemic when I was practicing a lot of these techniques, and a lot of them are quite quiet. The Angelface is loud, but it's very hot mic'd. In a room, it's quiet without the amplification, and those are the types of sounds I was able to make in that first year of the lockdown. Like I said, with neighbors right here. So I got used to making interesting small sounds and amplifying them, and to create worlds where it's sort of like a magnifying glass looking in on this very, very soft but busy world, and then blowing it up to sort of feel larger than life.
I'm totally gonna go listen to the album again after this conversation now, because I'm that's so interesting how you use the pandemic, maybe unconsciously, but like as a way to or I don't say use the pandemic, but like because of the situation, you were forced to have to play quietly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that put you in this creative headspace to be like, well, let me mess with these sounds and see what I can kind of come up with and like what that can do. That's so, like, I love how that's just so clever. I love how you like you dug into that and then went with it. Um, the you mentioned, yeah, the recording process. I was actually going to ask you about that, like how you like the program notes for your album is so interesting, and so I wanted to ask a little bit about that, and then could you kind of, yeah, could you talk a little bit about the program notes, like because you
Yeah,
traveled to your
yeah,
hometown, right? And then
yeah. I traveled back. So I left when I was 18. I left home to go to college, and then from there, through a series of moves, ended up in New York City in 2005, which I've lived here now for 16 years. And um, yeah, part of me's always wanted to go back to my home in Western Canada, and spend some significant time there. And the pandemic, when all gigs got canceled, for me at least, it felt like, once travel was at a point in which it was safe, and I felt I could commit to the quarantine periods and commit to sort of the regulations on the side of both governments in order to do it safely. I went back home and to my childhood home where my parents are, and spent, I guess the first time I went back was 7 weeks, which was longer than I've ever spent since I was 18. And it was a really, it was a really meaningful, important time. But to get to that, to be able to spend time with my parents, I had to quarantine in a basement suite by myself for 2 weeks. And this meant, just by myself all day. I knew I was going to want projects. So I brought, I got a new set of a new stereo pair, a nice Audio Technica 4041 stereo pair, which was really, the one thing I needed in addition to my 4050, which is the mic that I mainly use for recording. And um, and then I also fed in like a 57 into the bell of the tenor for one of the tracks. But besides that, those are the 4 tracks I had. I used a basic interface and just recorded myself. And I did this for, day after day after day until I finally felt like I had the shred of an idea. And then I would commit to that idea and, work on that and get that piece down. So the second time I went back to Canada again, I recorded, and this was in the winter. It was a winter solstice. I was in the basement again, and the days were very, very short. And I got used to just kind of seeing the moon out the window, and also it was very cold, so you could only go out for like a half an hour before you pretty much freeze. But the moon was out a lot, and so I got the idea of sort of creating pieces that were based around the moon. And on the Canadian prairies, you see the moon so brightly in the sky, whether it's a half moon waning, waxing, or the full moon, and it was just such a large presence. And I started thinking a lot about how this time was solitary time was affecting me, and how this was affecting the music I was making, and I mean, there are things in this album that are very personal. I mean, it's a lot of saxophone extended techniques, but it's also like it feels to me like a very sensitive and emotional album in a lot of ways. So when I listen to these tracks, it's I get kind of reminiscent of that time, and get very like I'm very close to that world and to that time that I spent. Um, yeah, so 2,000 Miles ended up being the title, which I um, I figured was the distance across the moon, but also the distance between New York City and this childhood home. So I ended up calling it 2,000 Miles.
that's so cool. It's 2,000 miles to the Earth, from the Earth to the moon.
No, but it's the distance across the moon, and I was like, oh, I'll take it.
Okay, okay. Well, that's cool though. I mean, it's. I love how you can make that connection. That's that's so interesting. I could imagine. Actually, I kind of have a good sense of it, but I've never been as far west as Alberta. So like, I have no idea what the sky or any of that is like. But I could only imagine being in New York City, like all of your time, and then spending like a solid amount of time in is Alberta, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
and
like the stars and stuff is like, how quickly did that just sort of start sinking in for you? Like,
Yeah, it's just the sky is such a huge part um, of that area. I mean, it's they're weather people, right? It's a crop growing. It's the eastern point of Alberta, right? We're right on the border with Saskatchewan. I was actually born in Saskatchewan and grew up there a little as well before we moved to Alberta. But it's prairie land, and they as Joni Mitchell says, that they are sky-oriented people. So you're always watching for weather. You're looking for rain. You're hoping for rain, especially now. And um, yeah, it's just like an overwhelming part of life there. It's like I remember a joke we used to tell. It was like you could watch your dog run away for 5 days, and just a matter of just there being a flat land and a big sky, and the horizon just is such a huge part. So I would get up in the mornings. My dad gets up very early. He gets up at 4 or 5 a.m. And I think it comes from that, just growing up on the farm. But he'll get up, um, and so I would get up with him, and we'd just watch the sunrise every morning. And so I kind of got, interested in, filming the sunrise, kind of watching this journey of the sun as it changed colors, as it started, with the cloud cover being very, very neon pink, and then moving into, more of a yellow with blue background. But yeah, you're watching the sky all day. And they live on an acreage in the country, so there's not a lot of buildings around or anything like that. It's pretty much what you're doing.
right, yeah, it like makes me think about Bowling Green a little bit, you know.
Yeah, it's similar, right? I remember going to Bowling Green for the first time, thinking, wow, I mean, and at that point, they weren't growing as much corn, at least in Canada where I grew up, as they are now. But I remember the corn being the one thing. This is so similar to where I grew up, except look at all this corn.
Yeah, that's so funny. It's that's cool though that I mean, it was a pretty like straightforward what you call it, like transition or something, you know. I mean, I don't know, some people, I met people in Bowling Green who wouldn't want to go to New York City or something because they were so used to the area,
Mm.
you know, growing up in like just flatlands and stuff.
Yeah.
So like for you, going from Alberta, Saskatchewan area, and then to Bowling Green, you know, it's like, oh, this is familiar.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did go to U of A, University of Alberta in Edmonton for my undergrad, which is a city, and
Okay.
it's also a city with, I think, probably one of the most or one of the largest areas of parkland inside of it. So there is quite a bit of nature and park within the city. It's really beautiful, especially around the river. But it's a city larger than Bowling Green. Um, Probably it's the second largest city in Alberta. So there was that aspect of being used to city life, being able to drive around. But I always I knew I had dreams of driving into a city that was much bigger than Edmonton. Growing up, I had that sort of fascination. And for some reason, I had this recurring dream a lot when I was an undergrad. But I always thought it was Philadelphia that I was driving into. Maybe it turned out to be New York. I don't know. But I definitely will never forget the first time I drove into New York City. And I was a student in Bowling Green. It was my second year. It's 2000, no, 2003, yeah. And I came to New York City with Greg Cornelius, who was a saxophonist and composer at Bowling Green. And he and I were driving in his Dodge Caravan. And I think we were listening to like music for 18 musicians or something like that. And it was raining. And I remember seeing the city lights of New York and just being overwhelmed with this idea of I need to be here. So that was a very pivotal moment. We ended up doing a lot of really really fun activities in that trip. We met up with Adam Mirza, a former Bowling Green alum, composition alum, who was living in New York already, and who was concertizing and had met all these really fantastic musicians here, and was putting on concerts all over, and hired this really amazing flute player to play Greg's piece. And it was a duo for flute and saxophone, so I got to play too. And Greg was running electronics, and we were in some person's garage in Brooklyn. And the flute player turned out to be Claire Chase, who at the time had just kind of started this International Contemporary Ensemble, which was a very small, grassroots kind of thing at the time. So, but that, like, being around all the musicians here, really, it was magnetic at the time, for me. And so, besides just that entry, that first trip, there was just the energy around new music and the things that we were at the time completely obsessed with.
Wow, that's a cool story.
Yeah.
Holy crap! Wow, it's interesting to hear. I mean, because yeah, Ice, yeah, they started like the early 2000s, right? In that time, and it's interesting to hear you talk about like these experiences you had, like watching the sunrise with your dad, seeing the moon every night, and then like going in the first experience in the city and stuff like that. Because it almost sounds a little bit like your process for um, composing 2000 miles. How like you said you were sitting in your apartment and you're like, well, I have to be quiet, so I'm gonna try these quiet sounds, and then I'm just gonna sit and mess with these sounds for a long time, and then you record it, and then you're like, all right, well, let's kind of go through it again, and like it sounds like you like to soak things in, and then sort of like, I don't know, you're kind of getting acquainted with it in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, the
That's
sounds. I mean, as any saxophonist knows, I mean, you just when you start playing, you enter a world, and that world is. I mean, you can be anywhere. Close your eyes and you're playing, and it's. I mean, whatever's going through your head, you can depart any situation pretty much in that moment. At
uh
least I found that to be a real place of departure. So, if you're in a small apartment, you can't leave. Um, you can, you have an outlet, or you can make one for yourself just by like falling into a sound world and just visualizing a place outside of your own physical environment.
That's really important. I think I did something similar. Like there was a point during the quarantine where I needed to be more productive. So I gave myself like a 7-day composing challenge, and I just like wrote music. I don't remember exactly how I did it, but like it was, I was write 7 minutes of music in 7 days. So
Mm,
like, so I was like, it was really just something to get me kickstarted, like
that's great. What did you write for?
I wrote for oboe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my girlfriend who I live with plays the oboe, and so I was just like, oh, I'll write a piece for her, and she always says, "When are you gonna write a piece for me?" So like, well, this is as good a time as any. Which I'm still like tweaking that piece too, even though it was like June of 2020 or something like that, or April of 2020. But yeah, I mean, like writing a piece in a week is like that doesn't normally happen. So you would assume it would take more time to keep editing it, I guess.
Mm, yeah, everyone's different, right? It's sometimes, and I know there's projects that take me months and months, and then there's projects that just seem to happen so quickly.
Hmm.
It just depends on the idea comes, and next thing you know, and I'm definitely um, still always learning my own process, because it's constantly changing. Um, but yeah, it seems to be like a long, long, long point at which then I start, and then things fly
Hmm.
once you get started or past um, that sort of threshold, that wall. Once you pass that wall, it's like, all right, time for two all-nighters.
Right, yeah.
And then like 48 hours later, you emerge, you're like not looking too humanly healthy, but with something that you're very proud of, or at least have put a lot into.
Yeah. Maybe there's not a lot of pride, but you did it. Yeah.
It depends, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, every piece is different. Yeah.
That's very true. Yeah, the album, when you wrote that, was that something where you conceived it, you were thinking about it like piece by piece, and then compiled it, or was it like the you see the album as the work sort of thing? Does that make
Um,
sense?
yeah, no, I didn't. I was just playing with different ideas, and I wanted to fully flesh out all of those ideas that I was playing with, and I had no concept of how long it would be or how much material I would end up creating that I really liked.
Mm.
So at the beginning, it was like, oh, let's play. Today we're playing, and there's no expectation or preconceived idea of what this has to be. I didn't know that eventually I was going to put an album out, because that was part of uh, the whole idea of what I was going to do in these 2 weeks. And I knew a second album had to come, and I was actually late on getting the masters to the label and all this. So I knew I was going to do an album, but I didn't want to, create too much just preconceived expectations or limitations even about the process. So I went in each day with a different idea, played with that idea for a while. And there were ideas that I completely scrapped that just I thought were going to be great and just didn't go anywhere. So I didn't use any of that material. And I didn't, a lot of times those ideas themselves, as I was playing with them, moved into new territory where there was a really interesting idea. So then I adopted new ideas. So that became apparent. The like Home 1 and Home 2 were the first 2 tracks I started with, and that technique that began the process ended up being really interesting. But I think through that process, I learned about the techniques I wanted to use during Township Road, which I had no idea I was going to do a piece based on those fragile harmonics. It's just that at some point in playing, I landed on a harmonic resolution that really hit me. It was like, well, let's see where we can go with that. And then that became its own piece. And yeah, and then eventually, I had way too much material. The album itself is over 60 minutes, and I remember feeling a little bit strange about an 18-minute track at the end, where it's just I just kept going with this one multiphonic again and again and again and again, and it just felt like, to me, it didn't get old. So I just kept playing with it and kept trying new things, and the track ended up being an 18-minute track that I guess didn't have to be on the album, but it felt right. Probably, I guess I could have cut one piece, but I talked to Kevin Riley, who produced it, with Relative Pitch, and he was like, no, it's great, don't cut anything. And it does fit on a CD. So it does come in under 70 minutes, so we're okay.
Yeah. No, I think the same thing with the last track. Like, listening to that, I don't ever reach a point where I'm like, all right, let's go into something different now. Like, there's never any sort of frustration, or like like the interest is maintained, honestly. There's
something repetitive about that particular multiphonic. It just lends itself to have this extreme durational repetition quality that, and every once in a while it does kind of resolve. I was thinking of the New World. Actually, that's what I was thinking of, the sort of New World Symphony first 2 chords, where I found the multiphonic that it does resolve to, and that it's always pushing to that point harmonically. And all of the repetition and all of the decoration and the different sort of tangents that the piece goes to always bring it back to that multiphonic that then eventually resolves. And it's amazing how long we can kind of sit in that, I say, like, metaphorically, that leading tone world, and not get too anxious. I guess as long as you're distracting folks from what it is at times, it doesn't always need to resolve immediately.
Yeah, that makes me think with playing the piece, like, so it was primarily improvised, like you didn't notate any of it, or did you? No,
I didn't notate it, but I liked the multiphonic, and this is it's the same concept that I used with Beacon, which is the first track on Dawn Treader, the album from 2 years prior. It's just a really robust multiphonic that has a lot of sort of built-in potential energy. It can move, it's versatile, it moves in all directions. There's a lot of ways that it can weigh on one pitch or another within the multiphonic. There's a lot of trill possibilities within all of the fingering. I can, because it has a lot of fingers down as I play it, you can move a lot of them off and go to very, very interesting places. So that's the idea of the piece, is it plays around that multiphonic and tries different things, tries different variations on it, and then resolves to a second multiphonic. And those 2 things I found prior to going into playing it, and just played it as long as I could, basically. And that, yeah, it's really, you can depart for a while once you've established something as being this firm A section or this firm thematic opener, this thing that, you know, anyone listening will have cemented into their sensory, you can leave and then come back to that at any point in time, and it's referential now. It's now we're revisiting. This is familiar, and that's, I guess, formally how I think of a lot of this work. It's like always trying to be aware of what has been said thus far, so that you, when you go back to those areas, you understand the context that you've provided someone already, so that you can pick up that sentence as you continue. And so I'm thinking about that as I'm playing it in real time. It's like, yes, if I keep coming back to this multiphonic or find interesting ways to now resolve back to this multiphonic, it gets us back to A, and then we can start again. And that's formally how Beacon works as well. I think there's 3 or 4 different moments where it returns back to the initial multiphonic and then builds. That one's more like build a mountain, fall off, build a mountain, fall off, build a really big mountain, do something else crazy, fall off. And then, yeah, New Moon goes all sorts of different kind of valleys, and then it has this secondary multiphonic that it resolves to at times. Yeah, I think, you know, being so close to this material, it all makes sense in my head about, you know, what's happening, but a listener might have a totally different take on it too. So it could be ambient, it could be something that's, you know, just there, but that's how I have formulated it and feel it and listen to it.
Well, it's so cool to hear you talk about it, because like it's not unlike how any other composer would talk about their work, like even like 150 years ago. You know, the whole idea of like tension and release, building suspense. You know, even the concept of prolonging the arrival of the tonic. You know, like in a way you're doing that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's all from just this bank of you know, music that I've listened to and have a familiarity with, that I want to do that. The real challenge is doing it in real time, and that's the thing that I've noticed has taken a lot of practice. So as a composer of notated music, it's very easy to zoom out and see these things and then have 5 weeks to figure out how you want it, you know, to sit on a page, right? And how then that page translates to the, you know, the sort of the time linear experience of it. And that's different because you have, it's just like being able to edit to no end your process and reflect on it the next day. And, you know, when you're writing in real time, you have 20 minutes to say something from beginning to end. And it's a real challenge because you're also doing it at the same time that, you know, you're physically in the action of doing it. So any mistake you make then becomes part of the piece, and that's, you know, better for worse, it's in there now, and you have to transform it into not a mistake. Right? I mean, if you do something, if you take a risk and it totally, you know, doesn't work, that's now, okay, well, everyone's aware that happened, so I better make that happen 3 more times so that it fits, right? It's like a puzzle. And so doing it in real time is like an ultimate challenge. And, you know, even just keeping track sometimes of what you've said up till then is difficult, right? It's like we have a lot of practice of that, of doing that, you know, and speaking and communicating, because we've been doing that all our lives. But, you know, we don't spend 24 hours a day or 12 hours a day, whatever period we're awake. We don't spend all that time improvising on our instruments. So we have less practice of, you know, just understanding what we've said and how we're communicating. So gaining that facility took me a few years. Like, I started improvising actually in Bowling Green a lot with a new music ensemble there that Dr. Keane ran, and I got involved in Thing and Why, which is a group that we started improvising together very early in 2006, and I did a lot of shows that were, you know, completely scoreless and just, you know, us playing together and figuring sounds out, and it was always interesting to me, but it never occurred to me until, you know, a decade and a half later to do an album of improvised music. And I think it was like Kevin from Relative Pitch reaching out and saying, hey, do a solo saxophone album. I remember just hitting me like, what? What? There was the music we recorded, the chamber music and the pieces that we, you know, got to a level of studio recording level, but never this idea of just an improvised album, which is crazy because I listened to so much of it growing up. I listened to so much. It almost always came from the jazz world. So, and even improvising saxophonists in the classical world that I knew of, I didn't know so much of their like sort of discography or output in the same way. And so I think maybe there was that barrier. But when somebody from an experimental label came and said, "Hey, I'd like to, I'd like to do an album," after hearing, like, he heard a Pope Alma show where Dennis and I improvised a full set, and he was like, "Yeah, this is interesting. This is music that fits the label well." And since then, it's made so much sense. There seems to be much more of a world for that kind of like the sort of classical crossover to free improv world than I ever knew that there was.
It
And
seems
that's
like
just my own blindness, honestly. Like there have been improvising saxophonists forever, amazing in all genres, that I just maybe, I didn't sort of see myself in that same trajectory.
yeah, yeah. Well, you could only be exposed to so much, like before yeah, like it makes me think about because this past year I started reading a lot about different tuning systems and microtonality, and I learned about Joe Manera oh God, I don't know I don't know how to say his last name. I don't think he's alive anymore, but I could be wrong. Maybe he's alive. I don't know. Clearly, I don't know a lot about this guy, but he's a clarinetist in Boston who like he extensively uses 72 tone equal temperament, and he improvises in it and stuff like that. I've been into microtonal music for quite a while. Never have I heard of that guy, and so it's like it's always exciting when you're exposed to this new composer, a new artist or performer, or whoever, and it's like your bread and butter at that, or your meat and potatoes at that time, and so you just like dig right in, and you're like, oh, this is sick as hell, holy shit.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I mean, it's like, when you find something out for the first time, remembering that this is just your personal experience of finding this out for the first time. Guaranteed someone has done this before. And you have to assume that someone has, and you have to assume that there's probably a generation of folks whose voices never made the mainstream that have like been doing this. And I know I've been surprised and found like so many artists, and it's just a constant flow of artists that I find out about on a daily, weekly basis that have been doing like their life's work has been in this genre that I thought I'd never seen before and never realized. So I think I try to approach that with the idea that yes, folks have definitely explored this territory already. I'm coming at it now for the first time myself, and probably it's been done it just means that I've probably just not heard it, or it hasn't been out there. So you try to avoid statements like I'm the first to blah blah, or
Right.
this great technique I found, because maybe it's been found. So just do what's interesting to you, and try to create interesting music in your own world, but be aware that there's a world of other musicians working, doing very creative, interesting things, and a lot of times have already explored those ideas in depth. Which I know as you as a composer, probably we all think about that, right? What's new? What are we going to do that's new?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a weird sort of thing, like because this makes me think about conversation. Do you know Doug Bielmeyer? I had him on the podcast at one point, and we had a similar conversation about like authenticity and voice, and being honest with your music and stuff like that, like kind of what we're talking about right now in a way. And it's like, yeah, it's definitely something that as a composer, improviser, even performer, like you're always kind of tackling with. I mean, because performers, if you're playing a piece that's been played, then you're like, well, I don't want to sound like this person, like if I listen to a lot of these recordings, am I going to now sound like that guy when I play?
Yeah. I mean, and then there's like the question. I mean, does this composer who's made this famous own this technique? I mean, this this sounds very minimalist. Does this belong, to someone? This idea belong to someone else? Or I mean, it's a minefield always. But I think that's really important, to explore those ideas and to push yourself as a composer to not only styles that interest you, but beyond styles that interest you, and tackle new things too, and don't be afraid to. So yeah, it's you try to just be as as creative while being conscientious, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah, I mean, well, it's like what you were saying when you were recording. I'm gonna check the time real quick because I want to make sure. Yeah, we're good. Sometimes I've done this before. Sometimes I set my alarm to go off, and I never actually set the alarm. I just put in 1 hour, and then I don't.
Right.
But we're good. It'll go off in 13 minutes, or yeah.
Or at midnight tonight.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be talking for like the next 12 hours and not even realize it. And like, oh wait, we forgot to stop. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, your recording process, or I guess I should say your improvising process. No, your recording process. Yeah, because you talked about how you had ideas that you're like, oh, this is gonna be sick. I can't wait to do this one, and then it just didn't work out. Mm-hmm. And like having that, like flexibility, not the right word. It's not flexibility, but it is flexibility. I don't know, wherewithal to be able to look at it and be like, you know what? I just have to push it to the side right now. I can't use it, and I got to focus on other stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess wherewithal is a word for that, but that's tough. And like what we were just talking about, like having you're being honest with your music and your voice, and like you said, like trying out new things, listening to different music and stuff like that. How do you get to this point? I mean, I don't know if that's kind of a big question, I guess, but like, for me, hearing that, I'm like, well, I don't know if I could do that so easily, or at least on the spot where I'm like, I got to record this record. Let me toss this idea out of here because it's not working, like.
Right. Yeah. No, it's like, I think it has to do with, I mean, the first explanation that comes to mind is age. Like the older I get, the less precious every little piece of material is. And that has to do with, the way that time flows. As you're older, you have this large backlog of ideas that, have just become less precious over time because they don't occupy such a large percentage of your invested interest, right? Or time up to that point. So having 20-year career, or I guess you could say that at this point, almost a 20-year like professional career that has now seen a lot of pieces. I've written a lot of pieces that have never been premiered for one reason or another, that are under strange like exclusivity that is just, I don't know what will happen to that material. There's a lot of things that have fallen through. And that's a smaller percentage, of course, than the ones that do see the light of day. But you start to realize like ideas flow and they come and go, and the importance of those ideas at the time might seem really, really important. And then it's, 5 years later, you forgot that project even occurred, and that thing that was, so important at the time, really even happened. So I think it helps now when I'm working in a momentary way in the middle of a project when something isn't working, just to have that experience and that strength to just say, no, this isn't right. We just don't do it. And I've noticed that with artists that I work with that I really respect, that they all have that same ability to say, no, that's not right. It doesn't really matter how big this moment is. I'm not doing it. And that can be for various reasons. It can be for artistic reasons, just career reasons. I mean, you have to live with yourself, and you have to, it's becoming a bigger response and a bigger topic than I know you originally meant with the question, but being able to step back and not overvalue or push something when it's not at the right time, or when it's not right for the album, or when it's not right for the project, is really important. And that's how you end up creating, good things. Maybe not as many things, as a sacrifice, but quality things that have been felt through and that you think you can do, and that you think work at that time. And even then, I mean, Dawn Treader, when I first put Dawn Treader out, I was so in my head about that album. I couldn't tell. And it's just becoming too close to a project in general, not being able to hear it or see it for what it is. But I got so because it was the first time I had put out a solo album, just so in my head about whether anything was working. I could listen to a track and think, wow, nothing happens in that track. And I could look at or listen to the track, you know, coincidentally in this later in the same day and think, wow, there's a lot in there. And like that kept going back and forth. And at that point I'd realize, well, this isn't going anywhere, just put it out and deal. Which is not a really yeah, fluid or lovely answer to that. It's just put it out and see what happens.
I think that's a really like, what's the word, like actionable thing to do though. Like it's necessary because like as artists we're like, we have to take risk in order to kind of get better, you know, and progress and stuff. So like just accepting what it is and putting it out there, I think that's totally makes so much sense. I definitely struggle with that when I finish a piece of music. Like I'll hit the double bar line, and then there are things in it where I'm like, I know this could be better, and it's not what I want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And like sometimes I'll go back and like change things, and I'll still work with the performer and stuff, and like I still do that. But like then there's also other times where I'm just like, that's that. All right, next piece, sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But and I like what you said too about having, you know, 20 years of your career and like this backlog of things you can kind of like look back on and reference or even just forget about, you know, just because so much you're so far removed from it. Because I sort of realized as I get older and stuff, like I sort of have more and more like what do you call it, like my own policies in a way. Like this kind of goes more to what you were saying about like career decisions, you know, where it's like someone who says, you know, like, oh, I don't talk politics at dinner, it's just a personal policy, you know, like that sort of thing. It's like it's you've experienced so many things in your life that you're like, okay, I don't have to experience that thing in this way at this time, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think that was a really cool answer with things that I didn't even think about, or like, you know, it was unexpected. I liked it.
Yeah, right. I mean, and every situation is different, and we're also different people every day. And we wake up, and the decisions we can make one day can be very different than this, you know, the next day. Even faced with the same questions, you can have a different answer. And it's you say that in a lot of fields, right? The idea that it's about what you do in that moment, sort of that moment to moment thinking. And so an answer to whether or not to participate in a project could, you know, vary from day to day. Say, oh, never work with people that are difficult to work with. And then the next day, no, actually, it's really important to work with people that are difficult in order to grow and to, you know, also have, you know, these possibly really, really interesting artistic projects come to life. And, you know, it's just, there's, yeah, I don't, I know that my process is not a very solid process, and that at any point in time I can change, which is a contradiction to, I constantly contradict myself. That's the other thing. It's very important to understand that there are two sides to everything, and but the most important thing is that you do something at the end of it, that you actually put something out there, that you do, or, you know, that you do take action, make actionable choices eventually.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true though. I contradict myself left and right all the time too. So I think we're very similar in that way, Erin.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I look at it as seeing both sides, right?
Totally. No, that's true. I mean, because I'll say something like very, very firmly too, and then I'll be like, yeah, but you know what? And then I'll like kind of think about the other side or something like that, or like other variables, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's true. That's why it's more fun to just make stuff, than to sort of think about it too much or talk about it.
Right. Yeah.
Talking is important, but yeah.
Just start, you know, moving, literally just start walking. Don't stand still and think about where you're going to go.
Yeah, and that's kind of a lot of what I do is just do something, and then eventually things will take shape. And that has a lot to do with the process too. I mean, just get something out there, do something, and then, you know, start. At least for me, that a lot of times, a lot of my pieces start from that. That idea of, okay, let's make some crazy sounds and let's throw them together on a DAW, and let's see, do I like the balance of that? Yeah, that sounds good together. Okay, well, I'm gonna transcribe that to some physical instrument and some vocalist, or some sort of sample plus instrument combo or something like that.
Oh,
And that's a doing way to start, as opposed to sort of this conceptual idea of orchestration, and then a notation from there, and then to instrument.
gotcha. That's cool. I know the alarm's going to go off in a second,
No,
and
it's
so I
okay. We
figured,
can chat a little more if you want to. I have a few more minutes. I don't think it'll take me an hour, full hour to
okay,
get down to.
okay, all right. Well, yeah, I don't want to hold you up or anything. But so what was I going to say? Yeah, we've talked a lot about your album, and I love that. That's like, it's kind of funny. This always happens where, like, when I correspond with people to be on the podcast, and we talk about things to discuss, and then like maybe one or two of those things get discussed.
Well, it's good though. I mean, this can be one of those podcasts where you have guests on multiple times, and then you have different projects each time that you kind of focus on, and then the tangents go. I mean, I've seen that, right? That format is kind of, it's a real format.
See, now you're giving me all kinds of great things to work with. Like, because yeah, that's so true. And I yeah, and that's also not a complaint either, by the way. I'm so psyched about everything we've talked about thus far. But I think one thing I want to bring up real quick is you have like such a varied, like such varied roles that you play in your career. Like, you're a composer, you have several ensembles that you're in, right? And then you also, is Thing NY considered an ensemble, or is that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, because I know you it's often, well, yeah, I guess yeah, okay, because I know you guys do a lot of projects and stuff, and I wasn't sure if it was like just like a new music sort of
Like a collective and whatnot. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, all
yeah.
of the players in Thingamwai, all of the musicians are also composers, so it could be, we can kind of live a little in a collective world,
Mhm.
a composer collective, where we write for each other. But there's, I mean, and everybody in that group wears multiple hats, so it just crosses us over into some really interesting project areas. Um, the thing why is actually probably most well known for, does most, at least the thing we get asked to talk about most, is the collaborative composition aspect of the group, where like being in a room with people and writing something together. I mean, that's like the thing why I was saying how much improvising we used to do. I mean, that really though, we compose together, and we compose just using all sorts of different material, text material, video material. We bring in game pieces for each other to play. We improvise. We write out straight up notes and learn them, and play chamber music together. So it crosses all of that. We also work with lots of folks in the theater world, the opera world, a lot, and folks in the poetry world, right? And there's just a lot of different areas that Thing and Why works in, and has sort of cross-pollinated with. So that group itself doesn't always come off as like a kind of in the box chamber ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
Not that any chamber ensemble is really in the box anyway, but I think yeah, working with that group, which is very different than working with New Thread Quartet. The folks are great to work with. Projects are different, so it just means that we focus on different things. But all of that, Hypercube, my group with Andrea Lodge, Jay Source, and Chris Graham, that quartet, as a mixed quartet, is also a fabulous place to just work and learn. And Popama, of course, the experimental aspect of Popama, all of that feeds my creative mind and my creative juices, so that it just always feels like I'm full of ideas. So I think that that's probably the number one driver for a composition career. Time is, again, the only thing that sort of you have to manage in a way where I can still find enough time to write. But the ideas certainly flow because of all of the scenarios I constantly find myself in as a player and rehearser and a collaborative composer and improviser, and just all of the collective heads in the room anywhere I go just feed my creative, like my not only my the material that I'm working with, but my will to compose.
That's so awesome. I love how you have all these different ways to kind of harness your creative energy and these different, people to work with and stuff. Like that's fantastic.
Yeah, and it really became obvious during the pandemic because, I mean, Hypercube kept up a pretty busy schedule, but at certain points. And Thing of Mine was doing a lot of virtual stuff online, but I wasn't in a room with a lot of my friends, and I stopped writing as much compositionally. I wrote a few pieces, like notes on the page type pieces, but I found it was harder to write, even though I had larger sort of areas of time to work with. And that says something when things are really bustling, when there are a lot of rehearsals happening and a lot of workshops, and I'm meeting with a lot of different composers as part of these groups, and we're involved in a lot of different projects. Those are the times in which I end up doing the most composing, strangely enough. And it gets shoved into corners and happens really late into the night, or early morning, and that's probably because there's so much activity and so much going on.
That's something else that I admire about you that I don't have, which is the ability to, because one time we met, in New York and we had dinner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you had your backpack with you, and I was asking you about your backpack and everything, and you mentioned that like whenever you get a moment, to compose, you got to break your stuff out and be ready to kind of, I don't have that. Like that's something that I admire so much about you, is like your ability to kind of just do that. And it's interesting to kind of hear about this process with all these ensembles and how when you work with them and like where your creative energy gets harnessed and how that informs your composing and stuff like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in New York, you have to be able to. I mean, you're sitting on the subway a lot. I'm sitting in airports a lot. You're sitting somewhere waiting for something to happen. Oftentimes, not necessarily driving. So it just, there ends up being places where
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather spend that energy trying to finish this thing that's probably late.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Once again, almost out of necessity, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. But I do envy composers that have that daily practice that, they get up and they work every morning.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough, Marilyn Shrewd comes to mind as someone with that sort of discipline and consistency. I know you've worked with Marilyn in Bowling Green, but also like I did too, and I remember that as being like kind of an ultimate goal that it still hasn't yet worked for me, but
Right.
but uh, but I think that might be um, something yet to try.
There's like you said before, there's always time to change your mind and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or try different things, right?
Kind of things, exactly. This piece I'm going to write only by hand, no engraving. This piece I'm going to write only by working from the hours of 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. for 2 weeks. I
Holy
mean,
shit.
I'm not ready for it either.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if I could do that. Yeah. Erin, the alarm went off a moment ago. I think our time is near. You have things you have to do, and but I would love for us to. I would love it to have you on here again at some point, and we could talk about all kinds of other stuff too, or any projects you have at that time.
that sounds great, Adam. It's such a thrill to talk to you. You're really good at this, so it just makes it very easy.
Oh, cool! Thank you so much. It's so much fun, and it's great. I mean, because we haven't seen or talked to each other in a long while. Like little things on social media and stuff, which is always nice. But this is so cool to to see you through a screen.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. I think I haven't seen you since you moved to Chicago, so it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's great. And next time you're back around the city, look me up.
I definitely will. And that goes both ways. Before we sign off here, do you have any projects you want to tell people about? Some social media ways they can reach out to you or follow you?
Yeah,
And
sure. Yeah, there's a number of projects coming up that I'm really excited about. On December 2nd, speaking of Marilyn Shrewd, New Thread Quartet will perform a couple of Marilyn Shrewd's pieces at the Domena Center. And the second piece we're doing, Evolution 5, will feature John Sampin on solo alto saxophone with the quartet. So that is very special for me as I as both of those professors are near and dear, and they're both amazing artists in their own right. And it'll be a little bit of a Bowling Green party. So, and also on the program, Lost Dog Ensemble, who is really heading up a lot of this. Garth Sunderland is an alum of Bowling Green, who directs Lost Dog, which is a fabulous mixed ensemble. Has been doing amazing projects in New York for a long time. They're playing 3 pieces by Marilyn, and then also a Momenta Quartet will perform a string quartet with Ariadne Greif, who's an amazing soprano. So that's not to be missed. That's December 2nd. And again, it's at the Domena Center. There's also Pope Alma has a show coming up. We'll premiere Rick Burkhart's newest piece for us called Wing, which is a kind of an epic 30-minute adventure. And if you know Rick Burkhart's music, then you know it's going to be not only technically demanding, but just like kind of next level artistically, out of this world. And if you don't know his music, check it out. Rick is one of the most interesting writers for all instruments, but has some very important work for saxophone. And that's the 11th of December. That'll happen at South Oxford Space in Brooklyn. And then Hypercube has a show coming up on December 15th at Greenwich House, where we are collaborating with the New York Women Composers Collective, and we'll be performing 5 different pieces from composers that are New York women composers and that have written some really fabulous pieces for us. And again, Hypercube is saxophone, electric guitar, piano, and percussion. So that's the 15th at Greenwich House. And all of these are up on the website, erinmrogers.com. And you can follow me on social media. It's Erin Plays the Sax on Instagram, erogers23 on Twitter. And I got a Facebook page too. So I'll try to post as much as I can up there, but the website's really kind of where I try to consistently keep record of everything. So if you're in the New York area, check those events out. I know there's a lot going on right now, but hopefully you'll be able to see folks at some of them.
Total. Oh my God. I wish I was in the New York area for that, because that all sounds awesome. Oh my God. The BG Samp and Shrewd one. That's really sweet. That's a really a lovely thing right there.
It's going to be a really special night. This is the 75th anniversary or 75th birthday celebration for Dr. Shrewd. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and as you know how important Shrewd has been to the saxophone catalog, but really, I mean, her entire composition catalog is just not as well known as it should be, and you know that often happens. You have a lifetime of work and it doesn't get appreciated until the end, but it in her case it's very much appreciated and has been performed by so many saxophonists and instrumentalists all over the world. So it's a great moment to celebrate her.
Yeah, that's so true. That's amazing. I'm glad to hear about that. Well, Erin, this has been such a fun conversation. So glad to have you on this. I really appreciate your time and everything you said. This is so cool.
It's great to see you, Adam. Thanks for doing this.